morning, everybody. My name is Angela Kirby, but I'm coming off as Nicole Holland-Sims because I'm using her Zoom session because we needed everybody's Zoom session today for Patton for our live conference. As I just mentioned, we had close to 3,000 people registered, which is just a testimony to special educators, related service providers across Pennsylvania. You guys are awesome. You're here trying to figure out how to support students and the students we serve. So what I wanted to share with you briefly, and then I wanted to thank Paula and Leslie, because we decided to try to reconvene this symposium about 2 weeks ago, and we sent out a survey. And in that survey, we had close to 1,500 folks who gave us feedback. And a lot of it was PTs and OTs who said, we need some help, we need some supports. So we did reach out to the Pennsylvania Association, Occupational Therapy Association and the Physical Therapy Association. And we hope to partner with them this year to be more explicit in having the state partner with professional organizations for PT and OT so that we can ensure that you're getting the supports you need moving forward. So what I wanted to say is I just want to give a hat tip to Paula and Leslie because they worked on this weekend to try to meet your needs. Literally, we were reviewing the feedback from stakeholders for the survey, like up until Sunday night, because we wanted to try to tailor this as best we could to meet your needs. So thank you, Paula and Leslie. You guys are rock stars, and I'm not going to take any more time, but let us just say that by the end of the day, we want to hear from you as to what would supports look like, how could Patton partner with you guys, although there's not a statewide PT or OT initiative associated with the Department of Ed, and that might be changing, given some of the advocacy work that folks are doing, but we can support physical therapists and occupational therapists in the context of our work at Patton. So please let us know how to do that, and we will be looking forward to your feedback. All right, guys, I'm going to turn it over to you. And Amy, I'm going to make you the host.
Thank you.
Amy, just one more quick housekeeping thing. You're going to see as the host, people are going to be needing to be admitted. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So, as Angela said, she reached out to POTA to see if there's anybody who could provide some support for practitioners within school-based setting. So I talked with Leslie. So just a little bit of introduction about ourselves. I'm an occupational therapist. I've been practicing for about 15 years in school-based and community-based mental health settings. And I am currently the vice president of POTA. I do work in a low-income school district, and within the Pennsylvania OT Association, we've started a task force to really look at school-based practice based on feedback that we've gotten from POTA members that there's not much guidelines, there are not any guidelines for the state for practice within the school-based setting. That's something that we've taken the initiative on underneath the task force to really look at. So that's kind of my role within POTA. And kind of what setting I'm working in now. So Leslie, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi, I'm Leslie Lewis, and I've been an occupational therapist for a very long time. I was a child prodigy. No, that's not really true, but I have been working mostly in pediatric school-based setting for the last probably over 25 years. I've worked in private and public school settings. I'm also involved with POTA, not quite at the level of Paula, but I am on our District 5 board, which is the Philadelphia, greater Philadelphia area. And I represent the pediatric portion of that board. And I am very passionate about making our therapy in schools quality and efficient and evidence-based as much as I can. So I was very gung-ho about being on the special task force to help out in any way to help support all of the things that I have questions about, and many of my colleagues that I work with. I happen to work in a completely antithesis of Paula. I work in a very wealthy suburban area just outside of Philadelphia. And so my resources are quite different than what Paula may have available to herself and her students. So But we're going to talk a little bit about that today.
Yeah, and so some of the reason that I felt like Leslie and I would be a good pairing for this too is because we do work in very different school districts. So one thing that we kind of want to say as a disclaimer from the beginning is that during this presentation, what we're really looking at is to provide you with practices that we found helpful in this transition from a brick and mortar education to virtual education. That each of us with whatever school district we're working under, they might have different regulations and practices that they want us to follow. That we're really, this is something, as everybody knows, that we weren't necessarily, no school district was prepared for. So this is really kind of our experience, and Leslie and I, through the task force and through our connections with the POTA since March, have been talking about kind of where to approach, how to approach within very different school districts as well. We're not providing any legal advice as to what's going on, but really looking at the research that's out there, kind of resources that are out there and what we have found useful. And just so that you guys know, so this morning we're going to be focusing a little bit more on OT practice because Leslie and I are both OTs. This afternoon we're doing a second session, or I'm doing a second session with Kathy Kultus, who is a PT who I work with within my school district. And so Kathy will bring in more of a more PT perspective. But we really feel like both this morning and this afternoon, that there will be information, hopefully, that all of you will be able to kind of see as useful. We're hoping to also have time at the end for questions and for discussion. And without further ado, we will continue to go. So really looking at that transition from brick and mortar to virtual. When we did this, when we had to do this in March and April, depending on what school district you work for, there was a lot of unknown. So you kind of go from a brick and mortar location of, the environment, the materials that are available. The routine and the structure for students is very structured. Most of the consultation happened with teachers, happened with classroom assistants, happened with one-on-one assistants. There were a lot more, the supports were different, that we were able to kind of put hands on kids and being able to adapt things right in the moment in a different way. So we switched very quickly to a virtual world where there's an unknown environment. Where are the students? What does the environment they're working in look like? We're managing tasks in a different way. So organizing for ourselves as therapists, there's a very different routine too, that depending on work schedules of parents and where students are, or what practitioners are trying to balance too, there's a managing of different tasks. The routine and schedule, it's a lot more unknown. The consultation has shifted some from not just the teacher, but also that parent. Some of the supports that we found is that there's a different flexibility at times using e-helpers, whether that's a parent, whether that's a caregiver, an older sibling. That can also at times be a barrier, and Leslie and I will get into that some too. Technology, again, can be a support, but it can also be a barrier. I know the school district that I work in, a lot of our families didn't have internet access. And so once we got that, was it stable? There's just different, as Leslie said, when she got on, there's at times, even if you have the most stable internet access, you can still have technology issues. And then barriers that we found too, that there's no direct way to modify. You've got limited and unknown resources in some circumstances. And it's just a very new practice to try to engage in as well.
Well, and I also think that just to add a little bit about like additional barriers, just personally, like for my own self, I had to learn all of the platforms and all of the things that were being requested of me, which I had no idea. I'm still learning how to do all these things. Paula's taught me a lot. But it's a whole big learning curve, which was so hard. Like within 2 weeks, we were up and running and going live with our students. And also fitting in all the parameters of the structure or the required technology sources, platforms, et cetera, that our district required of us. Like it's different for Paula than it is for me, like, and learning those systems. And then, also working within the district didn't have any clue what they were doing initially either. So like going each step of the way, first they wanted this and then they wanted this and then they changed it to this. And so, you know, just being flexible and having to do that, like we're all forced in this time to be very flexible, which can be overwhelming and exhausting sometimes. So I just wanted to add that as well.
And so, I mean, and I think Leslie and I have both talked about that in the spring we learned a lot. And so some of that too is our own reflection of, okay, what worked, what didn't work. I also saw a good number of my students who are in a life skills program virtually through ESY. And so I learned even more then and how to engage and how to really support those students. And so it's this continual learning curve, and how can we continue to support that? So where do
but not only just continue to support that, but to provide quality services in the best way that we can. I think that that's like something that both Paula and I feel very strongly about, is to try to do the very best job that we can given the information that we have available to us right now. And that's kind of what we're all doing. Like we're all trying to like take in all of this stuff and make the best decision that we can based on what we're provided with and what we can do.
So the question was kind of where did we start? In March, as different things were coming out, we went to our state licensure. We looked at our practice acts. What can we do? What can we not do? We looked at evidence-based research. What research is out there? There's research out there about virtual therapy, but it's typically, and I'll go through it a little bit more, it's not necessarily a wide variety of students who are accessing that. That it's not, right. Virtual therapy is not appropriate for everybody, but you know, that's kind of where we are right now. So where can we go with that? Looking at POTA, looking at PPTA, looking at AOTA and APTA. What resources do they have available from across the state, from across the country to really support practitioners? Looking at our state and school-based guidelines. What are our special ed directors requiring us to do? And what does that model look like? And it's going to be different for everybody. I know Kathy, who's going to be presenting this afternoon, she works for 2 different school districts. And so the school district that I work with her in, that what we're requiring is different from the other school districts. So one person might need to balance many different school districts' needs and kind of their guidelines as well. I know that Leslie and I, POTA, had 2 webinars that they did in March, I guess the end of March, with people who have been practicing virtually for years. And so we kind of took that and took information and knowledge from that. So where can that take you? I know there's tons of Facebook groups and discussion boards. So there's a lot of places to get information, but kind of how can you use that, as Leslie said, to really support and provide the best practice that we can do to support students who are also in a very unknown and changing environment as well.
Well, and I have to say that I've been really thrilled, honestly, with being able to turn to like in our case for OT, AOTA, and POTA. There's a lot of information that's available on both of those websites that is free. Some of it you do need membership to be able to access, but for the most part, the general information is available to everyone. And that will be my little plug for you to like make sure that you do join those organizations, because it's very helpful to support what we're all trying to do, which is provide the quality services for our students that we're working with. This is a list of a whole bunch of very interesting tele-rehabilitation and telehealth resources that I found. The first one is in AJOT, which is the Occupational Therapy Journal, and that talks about a study that was done with and about telehealth and the quality and the benefits of telehealth. And there's a lot of these other resources that are in here that talk about like rehabilitation settings and other practice settings. Again, like Paula had said, that there's not a whole lot of literature that we could find in the short time that we had to look it up for this presentation. And in my own studies prior to this, when we were forced into this like telehealth situation. But I also found this very last one is really interesting. It's a whole study that was done for the state on actual, like what the educational benefits of and barriers and things are for virtual learning for students. We know that there have been virtual academies that have been in place for many, many years. And so I think that some of the things that have been successful with them, we can certainly turn to and utilize those particular components in our practice and what we're doing. So I think that that is very useful and helpful information. You know, I know that I'm sure that you all feel like we do, like, I don't know, maybe not. Maybe some of you feel way better than I do, but I am feeling like bombarded with all of this stuff and like this like urgency to like have to learn it and be really good at it right now. And so I think that it's hard to like leisurely go through some of this stuff and read it, but I think it's also very useful to help us to be able to provide the best and the most quality therapy that we can. And certainly, just like every therapy session, we learn through experience and through doing things what was successful and what wasn't. And I feel like that is also very individualized to each of the clients or the students that we're working with. I have had some students, Paula said, I also work with some life skills students, and I had some that did so much better at home than they ever did with me in school that I would like encourage the parents to keep them virtual for forever because they did so great. But also I had super supportive, like their parent was an amazing helper and an amazing supporter of the language and the verbiage and the cues and the prompting and the positive reinforcement and all of that. So it really is so individualized to each of our students and our clients.
I think, so what we wanted to do too is to kind of take one evidence-based practice article and really look at, so there's all this information. This research that that I have up here, it looks at students who are aged 6 to 11 with deficits in visual motor and fine motor skills that impacted handwriting, which required IEP intervention. So not all of our students are going to be able to or fit within that category. But what can we take from this information? What did they find that was useful, that was helpful, that was supportive, that we can start looking at maybe this piece of what they're talking about might be able to be a resource to a larger set of our caseload. So different things that they identified were that learning coaches were essential. So that could be the parent, that could be an older sibling, that could be a one-on-one that might be at home, that could be kind of a caregiver. Looking at what information they could gather from informal observation of fine motor skills. They also used an evaluation of the print tool. So looking at different resources of how you can do more of a standardized assessment. And then the one thing that, and Leslie and I have talked about this a lot over the last 6 months, is that providing, they talked about on here is providing students, that each student participating in this study was provided with the toolkit. So I have a kind of a list of what they had in that toolkit, but especially for me, working in a lower income school district, that I found out very quickly in the spring that my students didn't have any resources. Many of them couldn't find a pencil, they didn't have paper. So how do you really look at engaging them in some of these activities when their resources are very limited? So what does providing them with the toolkit look like? And so the results of this evaluation is that they did find from pre and post test evaluation, they saw improvements in the 6 areas that were evaluated by the toolkit. So there is evidence to show that students can make progress within virtual therapy. So what pieces of this information, you know, my students who are life skills students don't fall into that. The students who I work with autism who might not fall into the same category of just the visual motor and fine motor deficits. High school kids, but what information can we gather from some of this research to say, okay, there is evidence that shows this, what pieces of this can we then implement into practice? And so that's what Leslie and I are going to go through over the next couple of slides to kind of talk about how we use some of these tools to then enhance what we've done over the last 6 months.
So we obviously, with all of these new demands that are being placed upon us, like we have to get ourselves organized. So, you know, that requires lots of different parts of that. That requires us learning the platforms of what we need to do, like educating ourselves regarding all of those things, obviously, and the technology that's available. Reaching out, like I'm so lucky and fortunate. I feel like I have really good OT friends that I can call and say, hey, do you know how to do this? Because I think there has to be a way, but I'm not sure how to do it. And like finding out also like the technology piece of it, because I am a little older, that like, and learning some of those things is I want to learn and I want to be more effective and efficient and productive with my use of technology so that I can do some of the things that I want to do with the students that I'm working with. So, you know, the other thing that you have to consider when you're organizing yourself and you're making a schedule is like I'm not sure that there's any evidence on this. I think it's personal preferences, whether you schedule your students like back to back to back to back. I preferred to do that when I did my summer sessions and because I also did extended school year and I did the virtual learning since March. And I preferred to do that. I felt like it was really easy to like click in and click out in a timely fashion and do that. But other people have found that they didn't feel like that they had time to jot down a note or write something down or keep track of their data or whatever. And so you might want to consider like giving yourself like a 5-minute window within that. That gets tricky if you're working in a school and you're like on a scheduled time, you know, like we have what they call flex core times, where we're allowed to pull our students, and first grades is at the end of the day and second grades is in the middle of the day and third grades is either here or here and fourth grade is here or here. So like it's very specific as to what times I can pull my students or work with them. So I'm kind of required to fit within that template. But just something to think about for yourself as you are getting ready. And make sure also, like I'm very close with the PT that I work with. We talk frequently. We talk about, because I am very sensitive to our students not having multiple therapies on each day. I think it's too much for some of our students to be able to handle that. And so I'm very sensitive to that. So I will check with the PT and check with the speech therapist. And we've started to, and I work in 2 different schools. And in both of my schools, we have implemented meeting as a whole team, the special ed team, to try to pencil in and schedule in our students so that we all are aware and we can see, oh, well, he already has speech on this day. I can pull him in the afternoon though, because speech was in the morning, so that will work out fine. And just working with everybody to try to coordinate all of that is really important.
Kathy and I this afternoon, we'll talk a little bit more about that collaboration as well.
Right. And then, you know, I created like a daily schedule sheet because I was having trouble keeping track, and I'll show you an example of like just a simple thing I came up with. It's not rocket science. And also I'm going to show you another one that I actually found from your therapy source, which I thought was terrific. I wanted to share that with you as well. But I did a daily schedule sheet instead of like an individual sheet for that particular student. I did it daily since March, and I found that was very user friendly. What I did is I just wrote my schedule in for that day, because it did change like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and now we're on a 6-day cycle, so it'll be day 1 through 6. But I would write down the student's name, and then I would like check off whether or not I actually sent the link for the meeting that we were having, because we're using Microsoft Teams as our platform. And so sometimes we were, for whatever reason, I think because so many people were using it, we were having trouble with the recurring appointments working. So even though I would set it up that, oh, I have this appointment with Johnny at 10 o'clock every Monday, it wasn't always working. It wasn't always happening, so that it wasn't always working. So I would have to resend the link to the parent to say, hey, here's for our meeting. So I was having trouble keeping track of all of that. So I would use this checkoff list to do that. The other thing that you want to consider is how to get materials to students. Paula had mentioned this a little bit. I mean, even though I work in a really like more affluent area, some of my students didn't have printers, so I couldn't send things for the parents to print. So I actually lived close enough that I was able to drop stuff off at people's houses if the parents were agreeable to that. Like I just made the copies at home or printed them out or whatever and sent them. And then, you know, inviting the student and the parents to the sessions, and then reminding of the parents of the sessions either morning. I know that you did something different with Google Voice or something.
Yeah, and I had every morning I texted the parents. Our district used Google Voice. So I would text the parents and I would say, reminder, we've got a session at this time. Because I think for a lot of the parents, they're overwhelmed with everything that's going on, especially if they've got multiple sessions. So it's just that reminder. And then we'll also talk about too that it was often a reminder, and then also reminding them what the student might need for that session. So getting them prepared. So these are the two.
Like this one on the left-hand side is the little thing that I made. I just put the day of the week and the date, and then I would write the student's name in. Did I send the link? Did I send the papers or drop them off at their house even? So, because I would be running out like at 9 o'clock at night and putting it in their mailbox sometimes, because that just happened with life. And then the activity ideas, I would just jot down what my idea was for that particular session. And then what I did in this is I just kept a quick note. I would just jot down how they did, so that this ended up being kind of my progress monitoring for myself. But I also found this one on the right is from Your Therapy Source, and I believe it was free, and I thought it was awesome to help you organize. So I just wanted to share that with you too. There's lots of stuff available for free from many different websites. We put some of them on here at the end, but there are so many really awesome things available, like on Pinterest and other places that can also help.
So the next part too is thinking about environment. Do you wanna take this one, Leslie?
Right. So when you're thinking about the environment, we have to think about our own environment. Like I happen to be in a room that's separate from the rest of my house, which worked out really great because I wasn't in the flux of everything that was going on in my house. I have 2 children, they're older, but still they were in the kitchen or whatever. So if I were in the dining room, that might have been more of a problem for me. You know, think about your positioning and your seating and making sure that you're comfortable. You're going to be online for several hours a day, which is different. We're usually very active and moving. You know, are you using a desktop? I happen to be using that right now, or a laptop, and sometimes even having like an external webcam that you can like move around so that you could see your hand or do something. I'm finding it a little challenging, like holding it up in front of the screen and like trying to position it the right way.
And then that reflection that within our school district, that's something that we've requested, is to have an external cam. Because if we're doing stuff, so whether it's movement for PT or kind of being able to give yourself more space, and then as OTs, there's different things that I want to model things for them, or I want to kind of show how to cut something, that I was having to do it like this and not being able to see, but to be able to do it in the reflection. So even to have that ease, if it's possible to have the external camera that can show what your desk area looks like or what your space looks like as you move around.
And that was something that was really emphasized in the sessions that we had in March with the people that have been doing this for many years. That was something that they had just as part of their standard part of their things. Now, if you notice, Paula and I are a little bit different. I'm an independent contractor and Paula is an employee of her school district. So she's able to get those items. Our school district won't, even though they're very affluent, they can't necessarily provide us with those items because they don't have enough. You know, obviously things go to their teachers and their district employees first, and then we're like the last of the session. So that would be something that I'm going to try to acquire on my own, so that I have it. So it just makes my life easier. Just think about the lighting and the physical space, and then you also have to consider all those things with the student. I had a lot of students that were like sitting in their bed when there was their OT session. I'm like, you really can't write so well if you're sitting in your bed. So just trying to work with that e-helper and the student and have them be ready for their sessions, and having their, like, making sure that their seating position and their chair and all of that, wherever they might be working, is appropriate for them, or modified, you know, by a pillow and a stool and that kind of thing, because a lot of our kiddos are sitting at their dining room table, and the depth of the chair is too much and their feet don't touch the floor, and so they're really wiggling and jiggling, and so writing is very challenging for them. But just to think about all of those things, and then also the potential distractions, like, can mom move you to a different space because Johnny, your little brother, is running through here all the time? Or can somebody take Johnny so that you can hear better? I mean, I think that most of our students, you know, and parents have tried to set it up so that they have a workspace, but that's just something to also consider.
And then, I mean, and kind of with that environment, the distractions piece of it too, is having that communication with the family before setting up a schedule. There's one kid who I worked with who had a younger brother, so mom requested that we try to have sessions during the younger brother's nap, so there's less distraction. So it's a lot of, there's so many different moving pieces, but really how do we support the student in the best way that they can? And it's not going to be perfect, but are there little shifts that we can do so that, you know, and again, in that situation, the kindergarten student with the brother taking a nap, that meant that mom could be there and could be kind of that e-helper as well. A lot more focused on what was going on rather than having to balance two different things at the same time. So looking at supports, what supports do we have available to us? So we've talked about the e-helper at home. And I'll talk about that in a little bit more depth. So looking at the collaboration with teachers, other related service providers, other staff, and then also looking at your larger community. So we talked about your state associations, your national associations. Where can you find supports within that from people who are trying to problem solve through this as well? Are there people that you can contact that have been providing virtual therapy for longer periods of time, not just kind of through the last 6 months, who might be able to provide some extra resources for you, or just kind of be able to give you some suggestions of what they found works. There's a lot of resources available online for treatment ideas. So Leslie and I have some that we put on here, and then Kathy will share a lot this afternoon that she's used as in providing PT services. And then technology. So how can you, Leslie mentioned before that for some kids, they've really embraced this technology. So how can you kind of make this the motivator at times and use the technology as a support, even though at times it's also a barrier too. So how do you really find that balance? So one thing we wanted to spend a little bit more time about is really e-helpers. So again, it could be a parent. For some of the kids that I worked with, it was an older sibling or a cousin. It might be kind of a caregiver, a grandparent. That e-helper can be many different people.
I've also had siblings, like older siblings of some of my students, be e-helpers, and actually they were the best. I love them.
But how can you really engage them to kind of have that discussion with them, to really talk about what as an e-helper do we need you to do, and what is not going to be helpful in that. And it's really going to vary, and some people will be receptive to kind of that direction, and other people might have a harder time. So really looking at what you do want that e-helper to do. And I guess this is kind of geared more towards the younger students, the students with more complex disabilities, that kind of thing is kind of where I find some of that. As the students get older, sometimes they don't necessarily need that e-helper, but even to have a parent or an e-helper within earshot to say, hey, can you help with this, just in case it becomes a little bit more difficult. So really looking at having the e-helper have something to readily reinforce if available. Having the e-helper get excited and give praise when they respond. So we can provide some of that praise virtually, but it might be different if the e-helper can do it too. There's some kids who have really embraced giving a virtual high five, and they get really excited about that. Some kids don't really care, that's strange for them still. Having the e-helper redirect the child back to the session if they get distracted, kind of as you can kind of direct some of that too. And they can also be used to kind of participate in activities and games together. They can model different exercises that you're trying to get a student to do. I know that different sessions that Kathy and I have done together, that sometimes she'll have the parent do it and then the kid can kind of follow those movements too. And they can kind of help the student remain focused. So different don'ts: don't yell at your child if he or she does not know the correct answer. I know sometimes the e-helpers want to do the work for the kids, and we don't really want them to leave the room or to take phone calls because that can be a bigger distraction. And so kind of examples, I mean, there's a student that I work with who is an ES student. He's a younger ES student. And there's a lot of tension between the kid and mom. And so mom was the e-helper. But so when I would give the kid a directive and the kid would do something else, rather than mom repeating what the directive was, she would say, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. And so I would see the behaviors escalate. So then it becomes having that conversation beforehand before having sessions, or even to kind of have a phone call to say, this is what I'm seeing happening. This is how you can be supportive. I know I can understand that it gets frustrating for you when he's not listening, but if you can just kind of repeat what I'm saying, then hopefully we can keep talking about what we do want him to do than what we don't want him to do. Because a lot of parents don't, the parents have a different role in the kids' lives than we do, and then the teachers do. So how can you really, so the kids might respond differently to a parent than they might to us. So how can you really support that role as an e-helper to really support and help what you need them to do? I don't know.
And I think also in a situation that I had, I actually reached out to the classroom teacher and the behavioral specialist and some of the other service providers with a student that I was particularly having a difficult time with. And we collectively came up with a plan, and like more of a routine and a scheduled kind of thing where we were giving scheduled reinforcement to this child, like for anything that he approximated what we were asking him to do, because the mom wasn't very good at supporting the positive behavior. She was more of the don't do that, and it's helping her to learn how to do those things. You know, like if he picked up his pencil, I'd give him a star. And if he earned 5 stars, I'd put on a go noodle for a minute, you know, in between what we were doing to positively reinforce him right at the moment. So that was very helpful for me for this more challenging student. Is I went to some of my other colleagues to help out with that as well. And it seemed to work out pretty well.
Collaboration with the colleagues can also be, so everybody's asking the e-helper to do the same thing. So the e-helper is then not getting different messages from each person. So how can you work as a team collaboratively, and that e-helper is part of that, to really support the student the best you can. So preparing for sessions, we've kind of talked about some of this stuff. So assessing what they have. I've done different checklists for parents that I might kind of do a list of things. Hey, can you just let me know what you do and you don't have? And so some of the parents that I work with, they'll take a screenshot, highlight it, send it back to me. Because Leslie talked about they might not have printer access, that kind of thing too. So what things might you need that you can kind of come up with, and then you can start preparing for sessions or getting materials there. So what I did this summer for the 5 weeks of extended school year that I did within our district, I actually created packets for 5 weeks. And so these pictures are some of the things that I sent into packets. So I had a whole envelope that had activities for each week. I sent scissors, I sent glue, I sent pencils, because then I could actually do a session that was meaningful to the kids and we could actually work on goals. And then each week I would pull out the different materials that the kids would need. The kid or the student or the e-helper would pull out what they needed for that week, and we would go from there. But it made those sessions a lot more feasible, and I felt like we were actually able to work on the goals a little bit more. And so we just mailed, before ESY started, we just mailed stuff out to the families. And then Leslie and I also talked about this earlier, is communicating what is needed for those sessions. So beforehand, if you know that you're going to need something that they might not have right there, to communicate that ahead of time, so it's not people scrambling around to find things. So looking at intervention, there's a lot of different ways that we found to provide intervention, different ways, whether it's sending stuff and printing it, or creating stuff virtually, or having the parents kind of have the tools there and writing it. So Leslie, if you want to talk about the first two, because those are things that you focused, especially initially, you focused on a little bit more.
Oh yeah, so our school district required, when we first went virtual, they wanted us to create like a a warehouse kind of thing, like of different activities that the students could do. So even though I independently contract in the district that I'm in, there are several other therapists that work in our school district in the other elementary schools. And so we kind of got our brains together and we created an activity chart. So we kind of categorized the activities into like fine motor, gross motor, bilateral coordination, visual perceptual, like different categories. And we all came up with specific activities for under each of those sections. And so when the very first week that we went out, that's what we were asked to send out. So we did send that out to all of the parents of the students that we had. And like I would say to the parents, even though it included all of these other areas, I would say you particularly want to pay attention to the handwriting activities or whatever the goal areas for that particular student were, I would highlight that. But what that also did was provided other options for the parents to do in times that the student wasn't receiving their therapy services. They also had asked us to do videos, like to do asynchronous videos. This was comical because I did not have any clue how to use the platform that they asked us to do. So it took me like 4 hours to create one video of like 10 minutes. But I mean, again, it was a learning process. But what that helped also was some of the, and I know that some of the more involved students, I don't work with the AS population in our district, but I do work with life skills, and emotional support. And some of our students couldn't handle being on the computer with you necessarily at first. And so some of our therapists created videos and would send those weekly to the parent so that the parent could have the student watch them when it was a better and more productive time for that student, not just at 10 o'clock on Monday, but whatever time worked for them. Like maybe they're better in the afternoon. And so they had the student do the activity. And then what they did with that is they would get feedback from that parent. How did that go? Were they able to do all the activities that I had, or all of the activity that I had in there? I know our PT used this a lot for some of our students, and she would get feedback from the parent, you know, like, oh, he couldn't hop over the thing, but he could do this. And so then she would create the next video to work on the particular skill where he was still having trouble or difficulty. And then and Paula does this a lot and has a lot more savvy with her technology than I, but sharing the screen with tools and things. And we were limited because of the platform that we were using and whether or not the students were using the web browser or the app it depended on how well the sharing of the screen went. But a lot of times I could share my screen with the students, and I would do like scanning activities or other things with them on that screen of things that I found so that I could try to keep them engaged and have it be a more interactive kind of situation with them.
And then other things too So I used a lot of, we had different, for each of our buildings, we had kind of a technology person who did some different trainings on how to use different tools within technology. I actually showed Leslie how to do this. I did a lot of snipping of activities. So I'd take a worksheet that I liked and I would modify it. So the animal fun fact, it was one worksheet that I got from OT Tools to Grow, but I really wanted to work more on some of the visual tracking activities. So I snipped different parts of it and spread it apart. And then I would communicate with that e-helper and say, okay, when your student does this, have them look straight forward and then use their eyes to scan both ways to work on some of that visual tracking. Different resources that I sent home for some of my younger kids was the different letters and how to work on letter formation. And if we have time, I can show you another activity that I created with the other OTs who work in my district, is that we created an activity within PowerPoint that it gave kids step-by-step what they needed to do. So a spaghetti meatball activity. So it talked about what the spaghetti was, what the meatball was. The spaghetti went in between words, the meatball, in between letters, the meatball went in between words, and then it had different practices for them to do. And then at the end, the last slide was, now that you've done this by yourself, take a picture and text it to whoever their therapist was. And so they were able to text it from a parent, and they were able to send it to our Google Voice number. So then we have data then to kind of track and see what they were able to do. So, and that kind of brings us to some of that progress monitoring. That's the question. How do we know what progress the students are making. How can we kind of look at what's going on? So we have some slides kind of showing some of this, but within Zoom, and I think Google is now going to do some of the annotation as well. I think Leslie said Microsoft, the Microsoft platform also might be doing things now that school districts are using these platforms a lot more for education. They're kind of shifting some of what's going on within those platforms. But you can screenshot different Zoom annotation pictures that students have done, taking pictures, emailing and then texting them, progress monitoring for parents to complete at home if you have a pre-made chart, tracking progress on your own form, feedback from the e-helpers and teachers throughout a session, and then also designate one of your sessions each month to be a progress monitoring session. So different things and this kind of shows different interventions that I did as well. I have a student who the family did have an iPad and they did have a stylus, and it was a way to engage the student a lot more. The picture up top with the spaceship, there's an activity that I found on Inspired Treehouse that the kids can select their own mission, and with each mission is a different exercise core work that they can do. So in order for this kid to decide where he wanted to go, he had to write it for me. So I'd model it for him and he would write. So he was able to write it right on the iPad screen. And the parent who was the e-helper was able to sit there and say, even though this doesn't look like it was on the line, he actually did hit the line, because sometimes that stylus can have the writing look a little bit different. So again, having that communication. There was another session that I had with a different student with all these S words. The speech therapist was not able to attend a session, so she and I co-treated. They were working on a lot of ST and S words. So they would talk, so she would show a picture of all these S words and then he would write it for me. So there was a way that we could kind of collaborate and keep going and kind of support each other in doing things. A hidden picture that is an activity that one of my kids really likes. So I just shared my screen. He was able to kind of find it and then he would write what he found. So all of this stuff I have saved on my computer. I just took a screenshot of it and I saved it and there's data for me. We talked about sending pictures. I've got a kid who's working on drawing pictures of a person. So the parent was able to take a picture of that. So these are just different examples of different data that I have through those first couple months of progress monitoring. And then Leslie's done a lot of charts.
There's a lot of things that are available like for free if you look up like data collection sheets or other things. This is just like something if you were timing something or keeping a number of like that they would do so many letters or so many things like that, you could just write the date and quickly either circle the number or write it in the box that you had there. The next ones are, this is one that I kind of created. I use this all the time, not always in this particular format. I've played around with having the goal at the top like this and the date at the side, or having the goal at the side and the date at the top. I think I like that method better for myself. But this is an example of something that we did just so that I could keep data on the student. This is a goal that I had for one of my kiddos, and just so that I could circle or put a plus or a minus next to the letter, whether they were doing it like from memory or from a model or whatever, with writing their letter. So this is just an example of something that I created to try to help make my life easier when I'm working with a student so that I could keep track. Because then what I could do for their progress report, for their report card, is look back at all these sheets and say, wow, from February, they've really like learned 10 more letters or 5 more letters or whatever, so that I would have it all in this particular information. So I was pretty meticulous about trying to keep these as I worked with my students. And that was in the brick and mortar session, but I also used a version of this, or I just jotted it down on that daily sheet that I had, that daily sheet that I kept for each day of how they did with these particular things.
So these are just some different examples of what we used. Something like this could be modified for any goal that you have, whether it's an OT goal or a PT goal or a speech goal. Like any goal can kind of be monitored this way. And if it's something that you're asking the parent to kind of work on daily, or the teachers are having them do, then it's something that you could also send to the parent and say, hey, do you mind when you're doing this activity, when he's writing something, just circle what he's able to do? and what he needs help doing. Or if there's a movement activity, just circle what he was able to do or how many repetitions, so that it's an easy way for the parent to also track for you to keep monitoring that progress. So, and then the last thing we wanted to show, and I didn't add them to it, but different resources that we use. So the APTA and the PPTA would be other great resources for PTs to use. And so these are just some of the websites that we found helpful. And a lot of the just kind of searching for different ways to use technology for that support too. That those are different resources that are around too. So I know that we wanted to leave some time for questions. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen, and I did notice that there were different questions in the chat.
Yeah, they're asking if we could share some of the forms that we have on there. I'm happy to share them with you if we can get them to them some way. I don't know how to do that, Paula.
And I don't know if when you register, if there's a way I can see. I don't know that I can share a file. What I can do, I know that with the resources, I can copy it from the slide and send you guys those resources. So let me just kind of look through. Somebody asked about the PowerPoint. I can ask, I can create a document and give it to Angela and see if she can send it out. I would assume that she has a list of the different, of everybody who came on, that there should be a record of that.
Did anybody have any specific questions for us that we might be able to help you with, or
what did we do about students who either didn't have an e-help or simply did not respond to anything? I mean, it's challenging. I think some of that too is that when we started, especially with our more complex kids, that we actually called as a team and talked to the parent about what we needed, and kind of what that looked like. I had a lot of students who would just no-show if there wasn't somebody there, and I would just document it. That's for some of the families that we work with, there wasn't always somebody that could be solely helped and focused on them. So I don't know, Leslie, I think you had families that
we had. So what I would try to do in those situations is like go back to the student and find out what they really loved or what they really liked, and really try to like emphasize the student's likes. And even if it wasn't necessarily like super like therapeutic in terms of being completely related to their goal, I would try to use that to get them engaged in whatever it was. It didn't always work. It wasn't always successful. But then sometimes what I would do is, like in a situation where we had parents that might have been working, and maybe there was a babysitter or something that was there, that they maybe the babysitter wasn't super attentive, like I would just send an email and say, hey, do you think that we could have so and so? Like I would just give suggestions so that the parent was more aware of how the student was participating in the or not participating in the activity.
I also think too that that's something that if you're having a challenge with that, then you talk to your school, you talk to the principal, you talk to somebody at school, because that's some of the accessing, whether it's and knowing in your school kind of who you should talk to, because I think there's a piece of that too, is that maybe there's another resource that family might need that the school can help out with to support that student too.
Right. I asked about what about parents who work and can't do sessions till after 5. Our school district is not like requires us to provide therapy during the regular school day. So we aren't permitted to see students after that 5 o'clock time. I would imagine in a private setting you are able to do that, like virtually, but not necessarily in a public school. We're required to do it. So we just try to be as flexible as we can. Like sometimes I have a life skills student and both parents worked, and they would say, look, I can't be on from this time to this time. And so I just tried to be super flexible with arranging the time that did work for them as best I could, given all of the other students that I have on my caseload.
And something that I think it's that communication. I have one kid that I can think of that the mom worked 4 days a week, so we saw them that last day. And as the working later, I work for the school district, so my contracted hours are the same contracted hours. So it's kind of limited within that school day. The how do you get parents and students involved? I think some of it's really talking about what the student needs. Not every parent is involved because I think, and even now, but especially when everything started, parents were really overwhelmed. And so I talked to a lot of parents like, I know this is a lot. What can we do to help? And really supporting the parents and shifting things, saying, this will help the student kind of have some kind of routine. I talked to some parents about how to establish some of that routine, because that's not always a skill that parents do well or understand well when they're trying to balance many different things, many different kids. So what can that look like? How can you support that? How can you create an environment that supports that that routine and that structure and that schedule that the kids are used to from school?
Somebody asked about push-in services. I have a lot of students that get push-in services on their IEPs, and for the spring and then for the summer, they altered like the IEP provision. Long story there, but they made these like flexible learning plans for our students. But moving forward, I'm going to still have to, we start school in another week, virtually initially. And then this crazy hybrid model, I don't understand it completely, and I can't wrap my head around how in the world I'm going to schedule all my students. But I am planning on trying to integrate or push into some of like the regular language arts, because our students are going to have to be synchronous during those times. So I'm envisioning me kind of going on to that and seeing what the student is doing and seeing how that works to help like a lot of our students have aides. So I can direct the aide to help the student to be able to participate in that activity. But if it doesn't work, then I'm going to have to make a decision. I feel I'm going to have to decide, is this productive and useful of my time at this present moment? And if it's not, then make a change in the IEP. Maybe the student needs another individual session. I happen to have a little girl that's like that right now, that I feel like she needs 2 individual instead of me pushing in, because that's not going to be really helpful. I need to be in person with her in order for it to be effective. And if I can't be in the building with her, then maybe seeing her more times during the week will be helpful for the consistency of her following through with some of the activities and some of the things that we're doing. So it's very flexible, like it's very up in the air right now, and what the best solution to that is. I have gone in on some of the aid sessions where the aides are providing support for the student and pushed in there, and they're doing that virtually, and made suggestions to them of how to position the student better, how to facilitate a more mature grasping pattern, or all of those things like I normally would do if I were in the building with those aides and those students. I would help facilitate that by pushing into the class and helping the aide to help facilitate that on the days that I'm not there.
So a couple more, we've got a few more minutes. So somebody said that their school district had them calling parents, but they would not respond or answer calls, emails, texts, and that's frustrating. And I mean, I totally understand that. And I would document it, and I kept a log of every phone call, every email, every text, everything that I did. And then I was just in communication with the teacher or another service provider or a case manager or the principal or that kind of thing too, that some of it was monitoring that. And
yeah, our district was really good about, like, we would let the teacher know or the case manager know, and a lot of times they already had a relationship with the family, so they might reach out to them again and call and try to get a hold of them, or send another email. Or even times I know that some of our district people would go to the home and say, we haven't heard from you, is everything okay? And a lot of times it turned out that they weren't there, that they went to New Jersey for because the grandparents live there, and they just didn't think that they needed to interact with us anymore. But once we found out, I mean,
Leslie,
that was also helpful.
As you say that, because you and I talked about this too, make sure that you know your Practice Act and what legislation what your practice allows you to do if the families you are treating are no longer in the state because they've gone somewhere else. Because for OT, and I think most, I don't know about PT for sure, but for OTs, the student has to be in the state where you're licensed. So a family like Leslie had said that they went to New Jersey, she can't treat them when they're in New Jersey because they have to be in the state. So those are some things that become a little bit more challenging with some of the virtual. There's somebody who asked about doing groups that all IEPs are individual. And again, those are some of those things that districts are gonna say different things. And I would say, talk to your district about it. And if that means you amend the IEP, that means you amend the IEP. Like how do you really best serve those students? And then the question too is, how do you have conversations with our employer that virtual therapy takes more time? And I think that's a reality for many of us. And I know that that's something that as the focus of the POTA school-based task force is looking at, that we really don't have guidance on OT practice in schools. So I know, and from feedback from, and I think PTs are very similar, that a lot of people have huge caseloads. And then unfortunately, there's not that guidance. And so some of it too is having that discussion and saying, look, this is what my day looks like. This is how it looks like. I might need more help, especially, and I know that I've had the conversation with our supervisor and the OTs that I've worked with. We've had this conversation that we're behind in evaluations because we haven't done any evaluations in 6 months. So what's that going to look like? Because I don't know that administrators always understand what that looks like and what that means. So we start talking about how to really look at what that means and what that day-to-day looks like. And maybe that means that you need to have the support of a contractor or having them really, maybe I know in our district, there's IAs that might not, classroom assistants that might not have as much stuff to do. So maybe the classroom assistants can help gather stuff to mail it out or really, and I think a lot of it becomes communication, whether it's with the parent or your colleagues or the schools that you work with. And just saying, this is what I'm trying to do. Do you have solutions? And I think because it's a new model too, that I think it takes some time to kind of build that knowledge and that skill, which probably means it's going to take a lot more time too. And hopefully as we become more comfortable with it, it'll be easier too. The last question, somebody really fast just asked about the task force. It's part of POTA. So right now, we're working on it. We're going to do different presentations at different times. Join POTA and you'll get updates through it. But thank you guys all for participating.
Yeah, thanks so much. And good luck with everything.
PowerPoint to you guys as well.
Thank you so much, Paula and Leslie. So